Step out. Now.
Officer, this is my truck. I just bought.
Don't lie to me. Homeless people don't drive $60,000 vehicles.
I'm Chief Justice Olivia Stone. Check your system.
Yeah, and I'm the president. Turn around. You're under arrest.
You've just made a very big mistake.
The body cam captured every word. Officer Daniels had no idea he just handcuffed the most powerful judge in the state, and this 30-second mistake would cost him everything: his badge, his career, and $850,000. Quick question. Would you stay silent or pull out your phone if you saw this happening? Type your answer below and follow to see the moment this cop's world comes crashing down. 2 hours earlier, the morning sun cast golden light across Chief Justice Olivia Stone's private farm, where rows of tomato plants and herb gardens stretched across 3 acres of carefully tended land. At 50 years old, she had spent 25 years climbing through the legal system, and this small piece of earth represented something money couldn't buy: peace. She knelt between the raised beds, her hands deep in rich soil, transplanting seedlings she'd started from seed weeks ago. The overall she wore had seen better days, faded denim stained with years of honest dirt, but she loved them precisely because they reminded her that power didn't define her worth. Her husband had surprised her last month with the Ford F-150, a gleaming black pickup with leather seats and every modern feature. "You deserve something nice for all those weekend trips to the nursery," he'd said. She'd protested at first: too extravagant, too flashy. But she'd grown to love how it handled the rural roads leading to her sanctuary. That Saturday morning, as she worked the soil, she realized she was running low on organic fertilizer. The local garden supply store closed at 3. She glanced at her watch, dirt smudging the crystal. If she left now, she'd make it with time to spare. The decision came quickly. It was just a quick trip, maybe 20 minutes round trip. No need to shower and change into something presentable. She wiped her hands on her overalls, leaving brown streaks across the thighs, and climbed into the truck. The contrast was stark, her soil-caked fingers gripping the pristine leather steering wheel, her mud-covered rubber boots pressing the accelerator pedal. She caught her reflection in the rearview mirror and almost laughed. She looked like she'd been working construction, not presiding over the state's highest court. Officer Marcus Daniels had been patrolling the East Side Commercial District for 6 years, and he prided himself on his instincts. When he spotted the black F-150 pulling into Henderson's Garden Supply, something immediately struck him as wrong. The truck was new, probably $60,000 of gleaming American steel, but the driver, a black woman who looked like she'd been sleeping, rough clothes, filthy movements, cautious. His training kicked in: expensive vehicle, disheveled occupant, unfamiliar face in a mostly white neighborhood. The math didn't add up. His hand moved to his radio before he even processed why. Unit 47 running a stop check on a suspicious vehicle, Henderson's parking lot. The body cam clicked on automatically as he exited his cruiser, capturing the crunch of gravel under his boots, the distant sound of birdsong that would soon be drowned out by something far uglier. His pulse quickened. This is what good police work looked like, he told himself. Trust your gut. The woman was lifting bags of fertilizer into her truck bed when he approached, a hand resting on his service weapon. "License and registration. Whose truck is this?" His voice carried the edge of someone who'd already made up his mind about the answer. Olivia turned, genuinely surprised to see a police officer addressing her with such hostility. She'd been loading 50-pound bags of organic compost, her arms aching pleasantly from the work. "It's mine, officer. Is there a problem?" Daniel's eyes traveled slowly from her boots to her bandana, taking in every detail like he was cataloging evidence. "Someone like you driving a truck like this. Where'd you get the money?" The contempt in his voice was unmistakable, each word dripping with assumption. He'd seen this before, or thought he had: thieves, drug dealers, people who didn't belong in nice vehicles. The body cam captured her face, the slight tightening around her eyes as she recognized what was happening. She'd presided over dozens of cases exactly like this. She knew the script by heart. I purchased it legally, officer. I work for a living. Her voice remained steady, professional, the same tone she used when addressing attorneys who tried her patients. She reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat, movements deliberate, invisible. Daniel's hand tensed on his weapon. Don't move. I said don't move. His shout echoed across the parking lot. A customer loading plants into their sedan froze phone already coming out of their pocket. I'm just getting my license like you asked, Olivia said, her hands now raised to shoulder-height, palms open. It's in my purse. Homeless people don't drive trucks like this. Where'd you really get it? Daniels moved closer, his shadow falling across her. The accusation hung in the air between them, ugly and naked. She could feel her heart rate increasing, the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with threat, but her exterior remained calm. 25 years in courtrooms had taught her that losing composure meant losing control. I'm Chief Justice Olivia Stone of this state, officer. Please check your database if you need verification. The mocking laugh that erupted from Daniels would later be played in courtrooms and news broadcasts across the nation. Chief Justice dressed like that. You think I'm stupid? Hands on the hood now. He grabbed her arm, spinning her toward the truck with more force than necessary. The body cam recorded it, all the shock on her face, the way her body tensed the moment her cheek pressed against the sun-warmed metal. The click of handcuffs echoed like a gunshot. You're under arrest for vehicle theft and providing false information to a police officer. Officer, please listen. Her words were cut off as he tightened the cuffs, metal biting into her wrists. He began searching the truck cab, pulling out the registration papers she tried to show him, tossing them onto the ground without reading them. Then he moved to the truck bed where 5 bags of organic fertilizer sat neatly stacked. One by one he heaved them over the side, the heavy bags hitting the pavement with dull thuds. Where's the drugs? Where are you hiding them? Each bag split open on impact, dark soil spilling across the parking lot like evidence of some crime that existed only in his imagination. The customer who'd been loading plants had their phone up now, recording vertically the shaky footage capturing Daniels tearing through fertilizer bags, while a handcuffed black woman in muddy overalls stood pressed against a truck worth more than his annual salary. Hey, you can't record this, Daniels shouted, jabbing a finger toward the phone. Delete that video right now or I'll arrest you for interfering with police business. The person backed away but kept recording, the phone dipping and weaving but never stopping. What would you do if you saw this? Would you keep recording? Would you speak up? Comment below. Olivia sat in the back of the patrol car, the vinyl seats slick against her dirt-stained overalls, creating dark smudges on the pristine interior. Through the window, she could see her truck bags of soil scattered around it like a crime scene. Her wrists throbbed where the cuffs had been tightened too far. She'd spent her entire adult life fighting for justice, had written opinions that protected citizens from exactly this kind of treatment, and now she was experiencing it firsthand. The powerlessness was overwhelming, suffocating. She closed her eyes and began mentally cataloging every detail, time, location, badge number, witnesses. If this was going to happen to her, she would damn well make sure it meant something. Robert Henderson, owner of the garden supply store, burst through the front doors, his apron still on, reading glasses bouncing on the chain around his neck. He'd been ringing up a customer when he'd seen the commotion through the window. Officer, wait. He jogged toward Daniels, waving his arms. That's Chief Justice Stone. I've known her for 3 years. She's a regular customer. His voice carried genuine alarm, the kind of urgency that should have stopped any reasonable person in their tracks. Daniels whirled on him, hand instinctively moving to his belt. Sir, step back, right now. This is an active investigation. His voice had shifted into what he probably thought was professional authority, but came across as barely controlled aggression. Henderson stopped, hands raised, but he wasn't backing down. Investigation of what? She comes here every weekend. That's her truck. I've seen it dozens of times. You've made a mistake. I said step back. Daniels closed the distance between them, chest puffed out every inch the aggressive cop who had been challenged. You are interfering with a police investigation. One more word, Arshward, and I'll arrest you for obstruction of justice. Do you understand me? The body cam captured it all, the store owner's face going pale, the way he glanced at Olivia sitting in the patrol, and the conflict between wanting to help and fearing arrest himself. He stepped back slowly, hands still raised, but pulled out his phone. If he couldn't intervene directly, he'd document everything. The first backup unit arrived within 4 minutes, red and blue lights painting the parking lot in alternating colors. Then another. Then were there 3 patrol cars for one woman in gardening clothes who'd been buying fertilizer. From above, if anyone had been watching the scene, would have looked absurd. A small black woman surrounded by a wall of police vehicles, officers conferring in tight clusters, while curious customers gathered at a distance, phones out recording the spectacle. The sirens wailed loud enough to hurt an auditory assault that seemed designed to humiliate as much as to signal official response. Olivia sat motionless in the back seat, watching her peaceful Saturday transform into something that would be dissected in courts and media for months to come, knowing that every second of her humiliation was being broadcast in real time to a world that still somehow needed proof that this really happened. Officer Sarah Martinez had been on the force for 15 years, long enough to recognize when a situation had gone sideways. She pulled into the parking lot at 2:47 p.m., her body cam automatically activating as she stepped out of her cruiser. 3 patrol cars' lights still flashing for what dispatch had called a routine vehicle theft. Something didn't add up. She walked past the scattered fertilizer bags, dark soil spread across the asphalt like spilled evidence, and approached Daniels, who was standing guard near his vehicle with the aggressive posture of someone defending territory. "What have we got?" Martinez kept her voice neutral, professional. Daniels turned relief washing over his face at seeing backup. "Vehicle theft, false identification. Suspect claims she's some kind of judge. Typical story." He gestured dismissively toward his patrol car, where Olivia sat barely visible through the tinted window. Martinez followed his gesture, and something in her gut twisted. The woman in the back seat sat with perfect posture, despite the awkward position of her cuffed hands, her chin level, her gaze direct. There was something familiar about that bearing, that calm in the face of chaos. Martinez moved closer to the patrol car, her angle shifting until she could see the woman's face clearly through the glass. Recognition hit like a physical blow. She'd testified in that courtroom. 3 years ago, a civil rights case that had dragged on for months. She'd sat in that witness box and looked up at the bench where this same woman had presided with fairness and precision. Chief Justice Olivia Stone. The realization made her stomach drop. She turned back to Daniels, keeping her expression carefully controlled. "Did you run her ID?" "Didn't need to. Obviously fake." Daniels crossed his arms defensive. Martinez felt the temperature of the situation change, the air growing heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. She walked to her own vehicle, hand reaching for her radio, but first she approached the patrol car window. Olivia looked at her and their eyes met. There was no anger in that gaze, no panic, just a steady recognition that this moment mattered. "Chief Justice Olivia Stone," Olivia said, her voice low and controlled through the small gap in the window. "I suggest you check the state registry before this goes any further, Officer Martinez." The way she said the name, not as a question, but as a statement, as if she already knew who Martinez was, confirmed everything. Martinez's hand trembled slightly as she keyed her radio. "Dispatch Unit 23 needs you to run a name through the state registry immediately." The static crackle seemed louder than usual, the seconds stretching out like pulled taffy. Daniels had moved closer, sensing something shifting in the dynamic. "Dispatch, go ahead." She continued, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. "Olivia Stone. Need confirmation of identity and position." The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, everything still and terrible and waiting. Martinez could hear her own heartbeat, could see Henderson filming from his store entrance, could feel the weight of three other officers watching this unfold. The radio crackled to life, and the dispatcher's voice came through sharp and urgent, each word hitting like a hammer. Code Red, repeat, Code Red. That is Chief Justice Olivia Stone. State Supreme Court, advise immediate release in contact supervisor. This is priority one. Acknowledge. Martinez watched Daniels' face drain of color. Watched the precise moment when understanding crashed through whatever wall of certainty he'd built around his actions. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. His hand moved to his face palm, pressing against his forehead like he could physically push away what he'd just heard. That's not possible, he whispered. But his voice had no conviction. He'd already seen Martinez's expression, had heard the urgency in dispatch's voice. The body cam recorded it all in perfect detail, the way his knees seemed to weaken, the way his hands shook as he reached for his keys to unlock the patrol car. Get her out, now. Martinez's voice cut through his paralysis like a blade. Daniels fumbled with the door handle, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. When he opened the door, Olivia stepped out with the same dignity she'd shown throughout the entire ordeal, even with her hands still cuffed behind her back. Daniels' fingers trembled as he worked the key into the handcuffs, the small metallic clicks seeming to echo across the parking lot. The moment the cuffs released, he stepped back as if she might explode. Olivia brought her hands forward, slowly rubbing her wrists where the metal had left angry red marks against her dark skin. The indentations were deep evidence of how tightly he'd secured them, how little care he'd taken with someone he'd already judged guilty. She adjusted the bandana on her head, the simple gestures somehow conveying more authority than any judicial robe could have. Her overalls were still covered in dirt, her boots still caked with mud, but she stood there like she was presiding over court, her presence filling the space around her. Daniel's mouth worked frantically, words spilling out in a desperate rush. Ma'am, this was just a misunderstanding. A simple misunderstanding. You have to understand the truck and you weren't dressed like... He trailed off, perhaps finally hearing how his excuses sounded spoken aloud. I was following procedure, standard protocol for suspicious... No. The single word stopped him cold. Olivia's voice was quiet but carried the full weight of her position, her experience, her authority. She looked directly at Daniels, and her eyes held no mercy. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling. This was prejudice in uniform. This was every assumption you made about who deserves to own property, who deserves respect, who deserves the benefit of doubt. She paused, letting each word sink in. And this was illegal. I'll see you in court, Officer Daniels. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant traffic seemed to quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Martinez stood frozen, witnessing the complete reversal of power that was occurring in real time. The man with the badge and gun had become powerless. The woman in dirty gardening clothes had become unstoppable. Henderson's phone continued recording, capturing the moment for a digital audience that would number in the millions within hours. Olivia walked to her truck, her gait steady despite everything she just endured. The registration papers Daniels had thrown on the ground still lay scattered near the tire. She bent down, collected them carefully, brushed off the dirt, and placed them back in her glove compartment. The torn bags of fertilizer remained where they'd fallen, dark soil spread across the concrete, a physical reminder of the violation that had occurred here. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, the V8 rumbling to life with authority, and adjusted her mirrors with the same careful precision she brought to everything. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the body cam captured Daniels standing motionless among the wreckage of his own making, surrounded by three other officers who were already stepping away from him, already calculating how to distance themselves from what had just happened. The fertilizer bags lay torn and empty on the pavement, their contents spilled and wasted. 50 pounds of rich soil meant to help things grow. Now just debris to be swept away. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone who would later watch the footage. Some things once broken couldn't be easily cleaned up. Some stains didn't wash away, and some mistakes cost everything. Olivia brought her hands forward slowly, the handcuffs removed but their damage already done. Deep red marks circled both wrists where the metal had cut into her skin, the indentations so pronounced they would remain visible for days. She rubbed them methodically, her fingers tracing the evidence of Officer Daniels's excessive force with the careful attention of someone documenting injuries for a legal record. Because that's exactly what she was doing. 25 years as a prosecutor and then a judge had taught her that details mattered, that evidence was everything, and that the body remembered what words tried to forget. She reached up and adjusted her bandana, the simple gesture somehow transforming the moment. Her fingers smoothed the fabric with the same precision she used when adjusting her judicial robes before taking the bench. The overalls were still covered in dirt, her boots still caked with dried mud from her garden, but the way she carried herself had shifted. The power dynamic that Daniels had assumed cop over civilian authority, over suspect control, over chaos, had completely inverted. She stood there in that parking lot surrounded by police vehicles and scattered fertilizer, and she was the most powerful person present. Everyone there knew it now. Daniel's face had gone from white to red panic and embarrassment fighting for dominance. He stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture that looked more like begging. "Ma'am, Chief Justice, I apologize. This was all just a misunderstanding." His voice cracked on the word misunderstanding, desperation seeping through. "You have to understand, from my perspective, the vehicle and your appearance. I mean, standard procedure dictates that when there's a discrepancy between..." He was rambling now, words tumbling over each other as he tried to construct some narrative where he was the reasonable one following protocol. "A misunderstanding." Olivia repeated the word slowly, tasting it, examining it, like a piece of evidence presented in court. Her voice remained quiet, controlled, but there was steel underneath. She looked directly at Daniels, and the intensity of her gaze made him flinch. "A misunderstanding would be pulling over the wrong make of vehicle. A misunderstanding would be confusing my address with another." She paused, letting the silence grow heavy. "What you did was make assumptions about who I am based on the color of my skin and the dirt on my clothes. What you did was refuse to verify my identity even when I told you exactly who I was. What you did was throw my property on the ground and search for drugs that didn't exist because you couldn't imagine a black woman legally owning something nice." Daniels opened his mouth to protest, but she raised one hand, the same hand that bore the red marks from his handcuffs, and he fell silent. "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Officer Daniels. This was racial profiling. This was prejudice wearing a badge. This was everything wrong with a system that allows officers to act on bias instead of facts." Her eyes never left his face. "And this was illegal. I'll see you in court." The finality in those last 6 words hit like a gavel striking wood. Daniel seemed to physically shrink, his shoulders sagging as the full weight of what he'd done crashed down on him. Martina stood nearby, her expression carefully neutral, but her body language suggesting she was already creating distance from her colleague. The other officers who'd responded as backup were slowly retreating to their vehicles, none of them wanting to be associated with what was clearly about to become a career-ending incident. Olivia walked to her truck with measured steps, her boots crunching through the spilled fertilizer that still littered the parking lot. She gathered the registration papers that Daniels had thrown on the ground, brushed them off carefully, and placed them back in her glove compartment where they belonged. The torn bags lay where they'd fallen, soil spread across the concrete in dark stains that looked almost like blood stains in the harsh afternoon sun. 5 bags of organic fertilizer, 150 worth of product she'd purchased to help her garden grow, now just waste scattered across pavement. She left them there. Let them stay as evidence. Let everyone see what had been destroyed. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and the V8 roared to life with an authority that seemed to punctuate everything that had just happened. The leather seat was cool against her back, the air conditioning a sharp contrast to the heat of humiliation and rage she'd endured for the past 40 minutes. She adjusted her mirrors, checked her blind spots with the same careful attention she brought to every detail of her life, and pulled out of the parking lot at exactly the speed limit. The body cam footage would later show Daniel standing motionless as she drove away, surrounded by the wreckage of his own, making the torn fertilizer bags still visible in the foreground, like a monument to his failure. The next morning, Captain Robert Chen sat in his office at 6:47 a.m., earlier than he'd arrived in months. The message from dispatch had woken him at midnight. Priority alert, officer involved incident, with state official review footage immediately. He'd driven to the station in his civilian clothes, not bothering to change into his uniform, because he knew that whatever was on that body cam footage was going to ruin someone's day, possibly his own. He pulled up the file on his computer, synced the timestamp, and pressed play. 20 minutes later, he was still sitting there, but now his head was in his hands, elbows braced on his desk, watching the footage for the third time because he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Every time he hoped it would be that there would be some detail that justified Daniel's actions that would provide some cover for the department. Every time it was exactly as bad as he'd feared. Worse, actually. The audio was crystal clear, every dismissive word that Daniels had spoken, every refusal to listen, every assumption rooted in nothing but the color of Chief Justice Stone's skin and the dirt on her clothes. He pulled Daniel's personnel file, and what he found made his stomach sink even further. 9 citizen complaints over 6 years. 8 of them involved interactions with black civilians. 2 alleged excessive force, 3 alleged unlawful search, 4 alleged racial profiling. Every single one had been marked as unfounded or insufficient evidence or resolved through counseling. The pattern was unmistakable. How had this been missed? How had Daniels been allowed to continue operating with this documented history? Chen knew the answer even as he asked the question. The system had failed. Supervisors had failed. He had failed. While Chen was reviewing files in his office, the internet was doing what the internet does best. The video Henderson had recorded on his phone had been uploaded at 3:22 p.m. the previous day. By midnight, it had 500,000 views. By 6 a.m., it had crossed 2 million. By noon, Justice for Stone was trending nationally with legal experts, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens sharing the footage and expressing outrage. The local news picked it up for their morning broadcast. National networks followed by midday. By evening, it was international news. State Chief Justice arrested while buying fertilizer, ran with the footage playing in an endless loop. The video had been edited down to 90 seconds the moment Daniels approached his dismissive questions. Olivia's calm identification of herself, his mocking laughter, the handcuffs, the fertilizer bags being thrown to the ground, and finally her statement about racial profiling. 90 seconds that told a story millions of people recognized because they'd lived variations of it themselves. The comment sections filled with similar stories, with anger, with demands for accountability. Professional organizations issued statements. The State Bar Association called for an immediate investigation. Civil rights groups scheduled rallies. Daniels reported for his shift at 3 p.m., the same time he always did, apparently unaware that his life had fundamentally changed overnight. He walked into the station to find Captain Chen waiting for him in the hallway, expression grim. My office, now. The meeting lasted 8 minutes. Chen had the body cam footage queued up, had the personnel and had the termination paperwork already prepared. You're suspended pending administrative review, effective immediately, Chen told him, voice flat and official. Based on the evidence, I'm recommending immediate termination for violation of department policies, civil rights violations, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The union would fight it, of course. They always did. But this time the evidence was too clear, too public, too damning. The body cam footage would be shown in hearings and depositions in court. Every assumption Daniels had made, every opportunity he'd had to correct his error, that he'd ignored every escalation he had chosen, it was all documented in perfect detail. 3 weeks later, the termination was finalized. Officer Marcus Daniels, badge number 11847, was no longer employed by the department. He cleaned out his locker on a Thursday afternoon, his former colleagues avoiding eye contact as he walked through the station one last time. The lawsuit was filed 60 days after the incident. Federal civil rights violation, unlawful detention, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, in violation of constitutional rights under color of law. The complaint was 37 pages long and included stills from the body cam footage witness, statements from Henderson and the customer who'd recorded on their phone medical documentation of the injuries to Olivia's wrists, and a detailed analysis of Daniel's personnel file showing the pattern of racially biased policing that had been allowed to continue unchecked. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was read in a courtroom packed with media, legal observers, and citizens who'd followed the case since the video went viral. The foreman stood and the court fell silent except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the soft whir of courtroom cameras. We find in favor of the plaintiff Chief Justice Olivia Stone and award damages in the amount of $850,000. The gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire justice system. The settlement included mandatory implicit bias training for every law enforcement officer in the state, quarterly audits of traffic stops and searches, and the implementation of an early warning system that would actually flag officers with patterns of discriminatory behavior. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the street, satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters doing stand-ups with the courthouse steps in the background. Inside, Olivia stood in the hallway, still wearing her judicial robes from her own courtroom, where she'd presided over cases that morning before coming here to witness justice delivered in her own case. She thought about those fertilizer bags scattered across the parking lot, about the garden she'd been tending, when all of this started, about how something meant to help things grow had become evidence in a case about how prejudice destroys. Justice had been served. The question was whether anything would actually change. 6 months after the verdict, Chief Justice Stone announced the establishment of the Stone Justice Fund. The entire $850,000 settlement minus legal fees would go toward providing legal representation for victims of racially biased policing who lacked the resources or platform to fight back themselves. She stood at a podium in the state capitol, the same bandana from that day folded carefully in her pocket as a reminder, and spoke about justice and accountability and the long road ahead. Justice was served in my case, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years on the bench. But one question remains. The screen faded to text white letters on black background. If she wasn't Chief Justice, would the outcome be the same? The question hung there unanswered and unanswerable, a challenge to everyone watching. Share a story where you saw bias like this. Let's learn how to handle it together. Comment below and don't forget to follow for more cases. Because the fight for justice doesn't end with one verdict. It continues in every interaction, every traffic stop, every moment where someone's humanity is questioned because of the color of their skin. And it continues until the answer to that question is finally unequivocally yes.